Good evening everyone and welcome to our Facebook Vet Q&A session. I'm joined this evening by Jon Bowen, who is a vet working at the Royal Veterinary College running the behavioural medicine referral service. And this evening I'm going to be asking Jon some of your questions that you sent in over the past week or so. We're going to be covering winter cat care, so as the nights are starting to draw in, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about to make sure that our pets are well looked after. And we've also had quite a few questions on other topics as well, so we're going to get through as many of those as we can in the half-hour session. So, Jon, if I start off by asking you, as I say, the nights are drawing in, we're heading into certainly into autumn and then on into winter. What are some of the things that we should be thinking about with regards to making sure that our cats are well cared for?
Well, we looked at some of the questions that people were asking us about this. And one of the first things people are concerned about is, exactly as you said, the nights are drawing in, it's getting darker earlier, and concerns about whether they should be letting their cats go out after dark. And although in general we want cats to have as much freedom as possible, because for their own well-being it's better that they're able to come and go as they want, there is some evidence that cats are at greater risk of road traffic accidents if they're outside after dark. So you have to be very sensitive to what area you're in, but if you're in a heavily built up area with lots of busy traffic, then it may be best to keep the cats in after dark. Next thing we had quite a few queries about was temperature, so cats getting cold. Yeah. And I think Jenny and Francoise were two that asked about this. In general, cats, as they go into winter, they molt and they are pretty resilient to cold weather. They're less resilient if they get cold. So if your cat can come in and out freely, then that's one way to avoid any issues that the cat could come in when it gets cold. If there are any problems with that and you're concerned, then it may be a good idea to leave a shed open or a greenhouse open somewhere the cat can get inside, particularly if it's raining. So cats will usually weather pretty well with low temperatures, but less so if they get cold. Another thing that we had a query, I think, from Alison was on weight. And a lot of cats actually gain weight during the winter, so it's typical for them to gain weight during the late autumn, early winter, a few 100 grams, and they'll shed that as they get into spring and summer. So it's not something we generally need to worry about. If you're concerned about it, if your cat's continuing to gain weight, it may be worth going to the vet or cutting down their diet a little bit. But in general, it's something that they'll shed pretty quickly when they get into summer. Next thing, something that we had quite a few queries about fleas, and there's a tendency at this time of year to think that this is sort of the end of all of the problems with fleas, but that's right. Something we probably ought to be thinking about a bit more. And the last thing is activity. So as we're going into the winter period, cats have got used to being outside all summer, and suddenly it's going dark, there are fewer birds around, there are fewer mammals around, there's less to do. If your cat's like my cat goes and visits our neighbours on a regular basis and goes into their house, and they've got all their doors and windows shut. So he's starting to get quite bored and frustrated, so we have to provide a lot more stimulation for him at home. Okay, so what are some of the things that you might like to do with your cat within the home, sort of keep them stimulated and keep them, I guess, keep those activity levels up a little bit as well? Well, one of the things that we've done with him, because he's, what some people call a face planter, so as soon as he gets a bowl of food, he just scoffs the whole thing down. So we have an activity feeder, and that's one thing that can keep him occupied. We've got lots of toys, and it's interesting that up until, well, pretty much all the way through the summer, he didn't play with toys inside the house at all. He played games with us, but the interactive toys we had he ignored. Just this week he started playing with them again, because he's in the evenings, he's getting bored and frustrated, he's asking us for games. So we're just making sure that we play lots of games with him, doing things that he likes to do, and provide all of his activity toys again.
Okay. And certainly I know with my cat, I've tried toys with her perhaps at other times in the year. She hasn't seemed so interested. It might be worth getting those out the drawer again and trying her again with them. Perhaps, now that there's, as you say, not as much stimulation elsewhere, she might now suddenly like to have a
Well, he's quite demanding, and normally he'll come and ask for a game, and it's, again, just the last few days he started patting me on the leg and asking me to have a game.
And what are some of the games that you recommend?
Well, I think you've got to be a little bit careful with things like laser pointers. So they can be good for getting a chance to kind of practice predatory behaviour. So you get the laser dot to appear from behind something and then disappear. What you don't want is whirling round and round and round so the cat gets frustrated and stressed. Likewise, with these sort of fishing toys, you want to bob them around so the cat can then practice pouncing on them and grabbing them. You don't want to be whirling them around and round the cat's head.
Yeah.
I think one thing we we also picked up was the fleas.
Yes, and I was actually quite surprised when we were discussing this earlier, actually looking at some of the questions that have been coming in, because certainly from my perspective, I tend to think, the spring and the summer months are when fleas are rife, and that's when we really need to be on top of it. But actually, there's some more we can be doing now as well.
It's a bit gruesome because unfortunately, as we're going into winter now, we're switching on our heating, and this provides a much better environment. It's warmer, it's damp in the under layers of the carpet. That's a perfect environment for flea eggs to hatch out, and it also helps the viability of the flea larvae. And the other thing we do is that we get dirty feet, so we vacuum more often, and unfortunately the vibration of the vacuum cleaner on the carpet activates the larvae, which will then migrate to the surface and then will turn into fleas and attack the cat and you as well, and potentially all the other animals.
Sort of fairly regularly vacuuming would actually also pick all of those up as well.
Absolutely, but what we usually say to people is go around and do a vacuum and then spray that area with one of these household flea killers, because then what you're doing is you're causing these eggs and larvae to activate, you're causing the larvae to come to the surface or start migrating around and activated, and then the flea spray will kill them off. So at least then you're making sure you take advantage of the fact you vacuumed. The worst thing is to vacuum and not do anything, because then all of that becomes activated and quite soon you'll end up getting bites on your legs. And I think the other thing is it's not necessarily that you need to carry on using all of your flea treatment all the way through the winter, but if you can have a bit of a blitz now on spraying the house, vacuuming, and then make sure for a little while you're carrying on using the whatever flea treatments you're using on your cat, you'll probably find that the beginning of next year won't be quite as horrendous as it would normally be.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to know. Going back to temperature, one other question I wanted to ask, because we did have, as you mentioned, a number of people, Jenny, Chantal and Maria, all asking about cats perhaps getting cold in the winter, particularly when they're outside for longer spells of time. What about inside the home? Because obviously the heating starts to go on as the winter progresses, but then if owners are out during the day, perhaps the heating's not on 24 hours a day, how does that affect cats as well this time of year?
I think that's actually quite an important question, because I think we forget that when we're out, the cat still has to have somewhere where it feels comfortable, so it's better to make sure that you leave the heating on at a low level all the time. We've got one of these kind of new electronic thermostats, and we can set the temperature at about 21 degrees all the time. And so far that hasn't affected our bills, and it keeps the whole house at a comfortable temperature, so when the cat and dog are in, they're not getting disturbed. The other thing that you can do is you can get one of these heat pads, so you can get a heated bed for your cat, and therefore your cat doesn't have to be exposed to the temperature changes in the room. And that raises another issue. One of the other questions was, why does my cat not use or not like using the same bed? And that comes up when we're talking about heated pads. If you get one, your cat will use it a lot, but it may well go and sleep somewhere else, and that's because cats will move from place to place in order to avoid a build-up of parasites like fleas. So don't be too upset if you buy this fantastic new bed and your cat only uses it for a few days and then hikes off to somewhere else.
Certainly what happened with the bed that I bought for my cat, yes. Okay, great. Well, I think there were some really great pointers for cat owners, obviously, as we're going into the winter. I think we were going to move on next and answer a couple of quick questions on owner-cat interaction that we've had in. First question was from Christina. She asks, why does my cat bite me when I'm stroking her cheeks? And actually, she really likes that, but at the same time, she's biting. So what's that all about?
Think about this as a bit like a culture clash. So British people, we like to shake hands. We might have just about got to the point of hugging each other and kissing each other on the cheek, because we've been on lots of holidays and we've learned to put up with it. But culturally, we have these kind of distant greetings. Cats are like that, so their normal greeting behaviour is to walk towards each other, stick their tails up, make a trilling noise, blink slowly a couple of times, approach and sit down next to each other, and then maybe 1 in 3 times they'll make physical contact, and it'll be just a couple of rubs and a lick and then they walk away. Human beings seem to think that that cats want to have lots of physical contact, and some of them do, but if your cat's reacting by saying stop, it means that you're kind of pushing the cat's boundaries in terms of physical contact. So you say dial it down, a couple of strokes, leave the cat alone. Maybe when you're greeting them, do the slow eye blinks and things, and you'll find the cats respond to you a lot better. Okay, great. And another question on a similar topic was from Pat, and she was asking, why does my cat constantly rub herself up against me? So is that also part of greeting, or is that a different behaviour? It is, but it's partly leaving a pheromone chemical signal on you. So cats will, when they rub against an object, they leave a set of chemical pheromones that identify who left that kind of mark, and the scent behind, which tells other cats and tells that cat itself that this is a safe, comfortable place. When they rub against you, they're marking you as if you're another cat. So they're marking you to say, you're a friend, you're somebody that I feel safe with. And so it's quite sweet that your cat's doing that. Sometimes it can get to the point where it's a little bit too intense, but I would treat it as a really nice indication that your cat's comfortable with you and is trying to show everybody that you're a friendly, nice person.
Okay, great. I guess moving on from friendly cats, and another common theme of questions was inter-cat conflict. So that's both where we've got more than one cat living in the same household, and also sometimes perhaps other cats in the neighbourhood as well, and what can happen there. So what advice would you have perhaps to owners who are experiencing that their cat is in conflict with either another one of their own pets or another cat in the neighbourhood?
People sometimes have an impression that cats are completely solitary, and it's not true. They do form communities. And where they form communities is where there's a lot of resources like food and shelter, so that multiple cats can share the same area and feel comfortable with each other. So none of them are in competition with each other for food. So when we're trying to create an environment that works well in a multi-cat household setting, we want to have lots of choice for the cat. So multiple places to go and rest, multiple places to climb and hide, multiple places to eat, go to the toilet and drink. And essentially what that means is that the cats then can get what they want without having to queue behind each other or wait for each other or don't find that other cats get in the way. So the analogy I would say is that if you were going to, let's say you were a student living in a student flat and you find that everybody keeps changing the channels, so you don't get to watch the programs you want to watch, and they keep eating your food in the fridge, and they're using your mobile phone, and everybody's using everybody else's stuff, and it starts to get really tense and you start to fall out. Best solution is everybody has their own stuff.
Right.
And that's exactly the same thing. Lots of options and choice for the cats.
Yeah.
Next thing is stimulation. So the more cats can have things that occupy them mentally and physically. So it's something that we probably don't want to talk about too much, but cats are hunters and they're territorial. So if we can give them outdoor access, that enables them to do some of those things. And we've got to remember cats are partially insectivorous, so a lot of the time cats will just hunt flying insects. They're not necessarily going to be hunting birds and mice. And if we can't do that, then we need to be thinking about things inside the home. So activity feeders, like I mentioned with my cat, activity toys and play. Anything to increase activity levels means that the cats are less bored and less likely to fight with each other. Next thing is feeding patterns. So a lot of cat behaviour revolves around catching food and then eating it. So they'll spend maybe 2 or 3 hours a day feeding and 6 to 8 hours a day hunting. And they will eat something in the region of 10 to 20 small meals a day. So they'll snack and then they'll go off and do something else. So the best way to feed cats is with an activity feeder and ad lib, so they can eat whenever they want. And the only qualification to that is if the cat has a medical problem or there's a very specific reason like obesity that means you can't do it, then you may not be able to use that approach, but generally that's what we want. Next thing, we have concerns about things like home invasion. So this is related to problems of tension between resident cats and cats in the neighbourhood. And the problem we face is that if we have a cat door, that's fantastic for our cats, but for neighbourhood cats, it's an opportunity for them to get into the home. And if they're hungry or they're looking for shelter, they may invade the home, cause a lot of tension between the resident cats, maybe fight with them, maybe even spray mark. And that can create all sorts of trouble, not only between the resident cats and the neighbourhood cats, but also between the resident cats. So having something like an electronic cat flap that only allows your own cats in is a really important thing to establish from the beginning. And there is a sort of winter aspect to this as well, that exactly as we're experiencing with our cat, as it goes into winter, they start to get bored and frustrated, and that means that they redirect some of that frustration onto other cats in the household. So right now is an absolutely classic time for more arguments and punch-ups and irritation going on. And again, the best solution to that is to try to do as much as you can to increase stimulation and activity.
Okay, great. We also had a few questions actually from owners who were looking to perhaps get a new kitten or introduce a new cat into the home. And so presumably some of these tips would also be be quite useful for that situation as well.
Exactly. So the best way to think about it is that if you were going to have somebody come to stay with you, you'd make sure that you had extra food, that you prepared a nice bed for them, that everything was set up to make them feel at home, so that they weren't going to impose on anybody that was already living there. You want to allow them to have all of the resources they need. Exactly the same for a new cat. Make sure that there's extra food around, there's extra water around, extra toilets, extra resting places before that new cat comes in. That way the resident cats get the feeling that there's more than enough. So if another cat is brought into the house, they're not going to regard that as a potential competitor.
Okay, great. Well, some good advice there. Another theme of questions we had was actually around nocturnal activity.
Yeah.
We've talked obviously about cats going in and out during the night, but actually we've had some owners who I think are perhaps being a little bit bothered by cats through the night. So certainly Carol and Karen have both asked, why their cats are suddenly waking them up very early in the morning.
Yeah, I'm not sure necessarily why it's sudden, but an awful lot of cat owners have problems with their cats disturbing them at night, and that's fundamentally because cats are what we call crepuscular, so they're active at dawn and dusk, and during the summer dawn can be very early in the morning. Yeah. But there's an added factor, which is that cats are also sometimes nocturnal hunters, so they will raid nests and go looking for prey in the middle of the night, and particularly if there's a moonlit night, that's a really good hunting opportunity for cats. So if they're inside, if it's cold out and they don't feel like going out, they may wake you up because they want something to do. Okay. If they're stuck inside, they may have no option, but it could be that in this case with these cats that they're getting wet and cold and they don't want to be outside, so they think we'll wake up our playmate and she'll do something to keep us stimulated.
Okay, great. So I guess to perhaps prevent that behaviour, making sure that there are some toys and so on. Yeah. Perhaps downstairs in the house.
It's probably also a good idea. Obviously, we don't want to disrupt the cat's life too much, but if well in advance maybe of autumn, winter, shutting bedroom doors so that cats get used to not having free access to you is probably a good idea. Otherwise, if you shut the door, suddenly they're going to wail and cry because they can't get to you. Anything you can do which is an interactive type of toy, something that responds to the cat and then gives the cat something to do, is going to help distract them from you. If you do have to get up, then try to be as calm and quiet and sort of non-interactive as possible. So go downstairs, put some food out if that's what they're interested in, and then go back to bed without stroking, interacting, playing with them or anything else, because then all you're doing is satisfying that need if they've run out of food or the electronic toys run out of batteries or something like that.
Yeah, okay, great. I see that we've actually just had another quick question come through while we've been chatting, so let's just address Anne's question before we move on. Anne is asking for advice on brushing her cat. So she's mentioned that her cat has very matted fur but really doesn't like being brushed and is, objects quite strongly, I think, when she's trying to brush her. What tips would you have there?
That's very difficult, I have to say. That's a really difficult one because some cats actually have quite a lot of sensitivity in their skin, and the kinds of brushes that we use pull on the fur or scratch the skin and are really irritating, particularly if they've already got problems with their skin and the fur's matted and maybe their skin's getting very hot. Sometimes the best thing is to go to a professional groomer and get them stripped back so that there are no mats, and then try to get your cat used to grooming at a very low level. So getting a very soft brush and very small amounts of daily grooming just to get the cat used to it. If it's already matted, probably trying to demat it using any kind of comb is going to really upset the cat. It's probably better to get that done by somebody else, and then to start very religiously practicing every day with a little bit of grooming to get the cat used to it, so that we avoid the mats building up again.
Okay, great. Moving on to our next topic, we had quite a lot of questions about both spraying and scratching in the home. Obviously, common problem that a lot of cat owners experience. I guess maybe it'd be best to start by asking why is it that cats, particularly spraying, if we start with spraying, why is it that cats spray in the home? Yeah,
I think the first thing is to understand what spraying is all about. So spraying is a territorial mark that cats use in order to timeshare space with other cats, which sounds like a bit of an odd idea, but If cats get into conflict with each other, the fights can get very, very bloody and unpleasant. And when cats bite each other, it often leads to abscesses. So most of us cat owners have ended up having to give our cats antibiotics and treating abscesses and stuff like that. So they try to avoid getting into fights. And one of the ways they do that is to have a territory which they protect, and they leave chemical signals through claw marking or through spray marking around the edge of it. Claw marking, when it's done as a marking behaviour, specifically means do not come into this area. This belongs to me, and another cat can identify the scratch marks and the odour, the smell of the cat that's left those marks. Spray marks are a little bit more kind of less direct messages. So a spray mark means don't be here around this time. So if I've left a spray mark, I'm a cat, that says to other cats, I'm in this area for the next hour or two, so it's probably better to stay away. If you smell this smell, I could be somewhere lurking around. So they will avoid each other. Right. So the idea is to timeshare. And that works really well out in the wild. It doesn't work when you've got cats sharing a home, spray marking to timeshare the bedroom or the hallway. And it doesn't work very well if you've got cats living inside who are spray marking against windows to timeshare with cats outside who can't even smell the smell. So it has a function, and it's just one of those sort of side effects that if you have cats indoors, they may be mixed together with other cats they don't get on with, but they try their best to do it by using spray marks to keep out of trouble with each other. So
do you have any suggestions in how you may be able to discourage that behaviour for those that are spraying in the house at the moment? Yeah,
well there are sort of two elements to it. One is the overall stress level of the cats. So if you can go back to those original tips we talked about where we're trying to make the environment really nice for them, that will reduce chronic stress. Then the next thing we think about is those chemical signals themselves have to be refreshed. So a cat will spray an area and then a few hours later come back and do it again. So if we can remove all of that smell, it will mean that it's less likely the cat will come back and mark it. So typically what we do is we wipe off whatever pea mark there is with some paper towel, throw that away, give it a clean with some water, dry it off, throw that away, and then spray with a solution of biological washing powder, about a tablespoon in a pint or two of water. Spray that on, that breaks down the remaining smell, wipe that off, and then spray it with something like surgical spirit and let it dry. So that removes 80 or 90% of the scent. And what you do is you identify all the places the cat sprays, clean all of them in one go, clean them all up again maybe the following day or 2 days later to strip all of the smell, and then potentially install something like a Feliway diffuser, because that will then replace the chemical smell from the spray marks with a facial and flank pheromone. So those are the kind of things that can be useful starting points for dealing with that. Okay, great. You did briefly mention clawing as well, and obviously scratching is another similar behaviour that the people have problems with. So Cindy has asked, how do I stop my cat scratching the furniture? And Annette has a problem with a cat who scratches the wallpaper. So what would your suggestions be there? First thing is think about why the cat might be scratching. So cats will scratch for several different reasons. One is to stretch their back muscles, so they'll put their claws into something, you'll see them sort of stretching. Sometimes to clean their claws, so they'll dig their claws into something and then wrench them out, which pulls all the loose bits off the claws. And the other is to leave an actual scent mark, and what they'll do then is they'll claw and you'll see them kind of squeezing their feet to leave a scent mark. If it's wallpaper, it's not quite so likely that this is stretching. It could be claw sharpening because they like that texture, or it could be leaving a scent mark. So if there's any friction between cats in the household, that could be why that's happening. By the sofa, what it typically is the cat wakes up, wants to have a stretch, and then stretches against your sofa and does a bit of claw sharpening. Or if they want your attention, they come in, they make eye contact with you and you don't respond, so they then start clawing to try and get your attention. So best things to do, if it's something like a sofa, get some thick polythene that you would use for building, drape some of it over. It may look pretty ugly to begin with, but it's protecting the furniture to protect that area which is being clawed. Put a new claw post next to that, rough it up with a wire brush, it looks like it's already been clawed, and wait until the cat has started clawing that thing, and has really got into a habit of doing it before you then take the polythene away. So you can squirt some onto the sofa to act as an extra discouragement to displace the clawing behaviour.
Okay, great. Well, we are coming into the last few minutes of the session, so I think we've got
very quickly.
It has, yeah, it has. We'll perhaps cover off a couple of other sort of more quick fire questions that both that have come in advance of the session, and actually just one that's come in while we've been chatting from Leslie. She's particularly interested in your comments on activity feeding. So Leslie says, I feed my cats twice a day, meat and biscuits at lunchtime. Should I be leaving food out all day?
If you can, yes. So some cats have got into the habit of gorging themselves, and they don't seem to have much of an off switch. So there are some cats who, if you leave ad lib food out, they will just keep eating it. But in most cases, it's better to have food available in some kind of activity feeder. And the one we have is a tower about so high with 3 levels in it, and the cat has to knock the food down and it gets to the bottom and then eats it. It's very easy. I mean, our cat's immensely lazy, and what he's learned to do is grab hold of the side of it and shake it, or put his paw inside it and then scoop the food into his mouth. But even doing that is better than eating out of a bowl. And what that means is that the cat can then come and snack and then go away. And that's the natural pattern, because cats would normally feed 10 to 20 times in the wild. So if you're feeding two or three meals a day, that's, in human terms, the equivalent of only eating every 3rd day. Gosh, imagine how hungry you would be. And that sort of hunger is what drives cats to go and invade other cats' homes, as we were talking about earlier. Okay, great.
Next, a question from Kathy. This is actually quite an interesting one. Is it true that cats tend to only meow at humans and not to each other?
No, they do use trills, so they'll make a brrr noise at each other, and they will go meow at each other. And usually these kind of meows they start with the mouth slightly open and then the mouth closes, so they have an ow noise to them. And that's a greeting behaviour. They do talk differently to people, and I think the reason is because our hearing is much less acute than another cat. So if you watch your cat when it's greeting one of your other cats, you'll see a little bit of a vibration in the top lip as it opens its mouth, and that's probably a very quiet trill that you can't hear. When they're communicating with us, they turn up the volume a bit, just because I think they realise that we don't hear these things and we don't respond to them.
I see. Okay, great. Yvonne asks, why does one of my cats scratch around her empty dish when she's eaten, often knocking the dish flying?
Okay, good question. In the wild, cats will hunt and catch prey, and eventually they'll get to the point where they've caught enough prey and they don't need to eat anymore, but they carry on hunting. So what they do is anything which is extra that they're not going to eat now, they will then go and bury it. So they'll bury it under sandy soil or leaves, somewhere where it will dry out and it won't go off, so they can come back and eat it later. Lots of cats, after they've eaten, will go through a mock burial of that food. So it's just like the mouse that I've caught, and I've eaten some of it, and I kick some leaves over the top of it, and then it's protected, and I can come back a bit later if I can't catch anything else. Sometimes they'll do a mock version of that with their food bowl, and it is a pain, because I've had cats that have done this, that have kicked the bowl off the work surface and all over the floor, but it's a mock version of burying their food.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. I've not heard of that one before. Lorraine asks, I'm getting a kitten soon. How long before I can let him outside?
Okay. This is a kind of how long is a piece of string question. So it's probably more important to think, what can I do to get the cat ready? So I'll talk you through what we did with our cat, and this is now 2 years ago. So we started by, when he was vaccinated, beginning to take him out into the garden and play games with him out there and allow him to explore, but supervised. And we would then make sure that he was coming in and getting food treats, so we would call him and get him to follow us and give him food treats when he came and came back to us. So we were practicing something like a recall behaviour. And we only started to allow him to have time unsupervised once he was completely confident in the garden and knew to come back inside the house for food or on with us calling him. What you don't want is to let cats at any age, so even if they're several months old and they seem to be very confident in the house, if when they're in the garden they're spooked easily, they're flattened, they're nervous and they're panicky, that's not a cat that's going to think rationally about where it lives and where it should be going. So you want to have your kitten at the point where it's striding around the garden, completely confident, not fazed by noises or birds or anything else going on, and then you're getting to the point when the cat's going to be ready to go out. But it's certainly not going to be for several months, and it also depends on roughly what time of year.
Right. And you mentioned obviously that the kitten should be vaccinated before
Yeah.
they start going outside. I guess microchipping is also make sure that they're chipped, just in case they do get spooked and run off early on.
Yeah,
That would be
I think that's a very good
another
idea.
important thing. And what about perhaps getting them used to a cat flap? I mean, I don't know whether you use one with your cat and how you would sort of recommend perhaps teaching a cat to use a cat flap or getting them used to using that for the first time.
Yeah, our cat was, I have to say, a bit thick when it came to the cat flap. It took quite a while for him to understand it. So we started off with the cat flap propped open so he could come and go quite easily. And that's usually the best way to do it. So what cats don't like about cat flaps is any kind of click or noise that happens when they open. So we want to try and switch off any electronics to begin with. And they also don't seem to like the feeling of the flap running across their back as they go through it. So you have the cat flap completely propped open until the cat's got used to going through it, then allow it to be at maybe 60 degrees, then 45 degrees, then a bit lower, and let them get used to putting their head through and nudging through. Yeah.
Okay, great. We are pretty much out of time. Let's just do one more quick question, and then I think we might have to wrap it up. Sarah asks, my cat growls and hisses if you go near him when he's looking out the window. There's rarely any other cats out there. Do you know what could be causing that?
Yeah, I think that the key phrase there is rarely. So imagine that you lived on a street where regularly you saw potential burglars lurking around in your back garden or in your front garden and sitting on your wall, and you saw them looking over the wall. You would feel very uneasy about seeing things. So it only has to happen a couple of times for you to become really sensitive to it. And it's exactly the same thing with cats. So it may be that this has only happened a few occasions when there have been cats there, but your cat's territory is his garden. So he doesn't want to see cats in that area at all. And if he does see them, he's going to become very watchful. So he's going to be quite alarmed and bothered about other cats. Definitely a good idea not to touch him when he's in that state, because he could become very alarmed by it. So leave him alone and try to not interfere. The best thing you can do is probably put up some glass etch film that you would use on a bathroom window up to just above his head height on that window.
Just to sort of frost and obscure.
Yeah, so he can't see, and he also doesn't then feel overlooked. So you've got to remember, he's looking out there thinking that another cat is looking in at him. So having that creates a visual barrier, and it means he's not going to be quite so stressed about it.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions that we've got time for today. I wondered if perhaps you could just very briefly recap on those key pointers of winter cat care, just for those who perhaps have joined us since we went through those at the beginning. Number
one thing we were talking about was this issue around darkness. So it's going dark earlier, and there is some evidence that cats are more at risk of road traffic accidents at night. So we want to be careful about what area you live in. If you're in a very rural area and the risks are minimal, then carry on letting your cat have complete freedom. But if you're in an area where it's built up and there's a lot of vehicles, then maybe you need to be thinking about keeping your cat in after dark. There's another issue we didn't sort of mention, which is that it's more common for there to be road traffic accidents around the time when clocks change and when it's getting dark early, just because people are not adapted to those driving conditions.
Okay. And
so
of course,
again,
we've got that coming up next week. So,
yeah, exactly. So that's another issue. And we also didn't mention another winter issue, which is firework night and Halloween.
Yes.
Again, nights where it's very important to keep your cat inside, because we don't want them to be terrorised or victimised by people. Then temperature. Cats can cope with the cold. They don't like getting wet. So as long as they can get in and out, or you've got a shed or something else outside which they can get into, they'll be perfectly all right, even if they get stuck outside overnight. But they do need to be sheltered so they don't get wet. Weight. Cats do gain weight over the winter. They'll gain a few 100 grams. It doesn't matter. They'll shed it during the summer. But if you're concerned your cat's continuing to gain weight, then talk to your vet. Fleas. This is the time of the year to be clearing the flea problem. So heating comes on. We're vacuuming a lot. That activates flea larvae. That means that we can get a sudden upsurge of flea numbers at this time of year, with dogs and cats getting very itchy. So vacuum, use an environmental spray immediately after you vacuum, so you kill off those larvae as they're becoming active, and do carry on using flea treatments for a while at least, until we're absolutely sure that the fleas are completely cleared. Then the last thing is activity. Normally cats will be outside most of the time. It's getting cold and dark and it's getting wet, so they'll spend more time inside. You need to make more of an effort with games, activity feeders and activity toys, just to prevent them from getting bored and frustrated.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much, John. That's been really, really useful. We've covered a lot of topics in the last half hour, so thank you very much. And we're going to wrap up now. Thanks to all of you who've joined us this evening, and especially thank you to those of you who have sent questions in. If you'd like to re-watch the session or any part of the session, if you may have missed it, you can do that via the playback button on Facebook. And in the next couple of days, we're also going to be posting this video onto our YouTube channel, so be sure to check it out there as well. There were some questions that we didn't get to answer tonight in the time that we had, so we'll also be posting some of those with some answers from Jon onto our Facebook page in the next few days, so be sure to check back and have a look at those. And that's it for this evening, so thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your evening.